Happy Thursday, everybody. Josh here with On the Wrong Lead, joined as always by Mr. Andrew Champagne. Another episode of Drankin' Champagne coming at you here. Andrew, we successfully tested something that I think we're going to pull out this Friday. So that should be a little bit of fun. But other than that, my friend, how have you been?
I've been pretty good. Busy, but good. Lots of stuff going on that I've been tweeting about and writing about for the day job. Lots going on. Honestly, it feels good to be sitting down. I've been exercising a fair bit and honestly, a little bit sore. So being able to sit down, talk some shop, and preview a pretty big deal coming up in about 2.5 weeks. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun doing this show. And if you like listening to us, go on down below if you're on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Really helps us out as far as making content that we hope you'll appreciate. But yeah, lots going on, at least in my neck of the woods. Some exciting news. I did just book my trip to Saratoga this coming summer. So that's something that, thank you, something I'm very much looking forward to. It's going to be the last week of the meet. It's a case where, honestly, my time off situation is not awesome. So wound up needing to really save my days and figure out when I'm going to be traveling, when I'm not going to be traveling, whatever. And being able to fly back on Labor Day is just a godsend. Saves me a little bit of time, allows me to do some other really cool stuff. So really excited about that. I wish that there were more direct flights from the Bay Area to anywhere. Those have been cut back significantly over the last 12 months or so. So having said that, though, pretty excited. I mean, it's always a good time to be able to be going back to Saratoga. I got to tell you, can't get worse than last year's meet from a variety of different standpoints. So a lot of optimism, lots to look forward to, and yeah, just a lot of good vibes all the way around, Josh.
Yeah, the way I kind of ended up in a similar situation as you with my PTO, and I get a ton of it, right? I have no excuse except the fact that I've used it all, and I just ended up taking a lot of shorter trips. So I'm going to Louisville, obviously, for a locals party for the Derby. I'm going to my family's going on a vacation to Mexico this summer, so that's going to be a week. And I have a couple days that I'm going to take, I think, in Vegas to go visit my buddy who's going to be getting a vow renewal up there. So it's kind of
Nice.
like I end up using those days up, and my vacation doesn't refresh till about mid-August. So that week that you're going is my target right now,
Cool.
if I am able to go. I know I've heard lots of it's a little bit slower. It's not there's not as many people, so that kind of does appeal to me a little bit because there being a little bit more space. But you know we'll uh, we'll see how things kind of shape up. I mean, I could always just book stuff and then figure out after the fact kind of what happens. But yeah, that's the plan as well for me. But everything's up in the air. I have nothing booked or anything like that. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But yeah, honestly, with the end of the big derby preps, I've kind of been taking a bit of a, I don't want to say a break because I've still been betting here and there, but I haven't been betting nearly as much as I normally do. And part of it is, Keeneland is the big thing running right now, and I never do particularly well at Keeneland.
Except for the very first show that we did from a handicapping standpoint, where you cashed on a pick six for 13 grand.
Yeah, I mean that was good,
Other than
but
that,
other than that, I have not done well at Keeneland.
give yourself a
And
little bit of credit for once in your life, Josh. My goodness, if you've learned nothing from me for doing this show together, you should have learned by osmosis how to take credit for certain things.
oh god, but yeah, so because of that, I just haven't been playing very heavily, and um, the next big thing coming up for me will probably be Derby week, which I know is still, I mean, we're still 2 weeks out.
Well, we're
So
actually less than 2 weeks out from 5-0 Tuesday. Huh?
yeah,
Huh?
there you
Huh?
go. Well, and
Yeah,
then isn't like Champions Day or something the opening day, the next Saturday or whatever?
I
I
don't
forget what
know.
it's called.
Honestly, they've gone a little bit overboard with the concepts. It started with the Thursday before the Derby, and someone got carried away.
But I guess the big thing is, I was kind of thinking, I was like, well, what can we talk about, Andrew? And I don't want to obviously handicap the Derby at this point, right? I think there's still a lot that can be changed. There's still a
Some
lot of
of which might be changed in a courtroom.
yeah, who knows, right? There is a lot of things still
Really
pending.
quick, and this is the only sort of airtime I want to give to this. If Amir Zidan's lawsuit winds up going forward and the injunction gets granted, that's not going to be the last piece of legal paperwork that people in Kentucky have to deal with. Because you think the connections of horses on the Derby bubble are just going to sit idly by and go, that's the breaks. No, they're not. If this injunction gets granted, and I don't have any sort of lead as far as if it's going to get granted, if it's not going to get granted, I don't know. Talk to a legal analyst if you want those sort of takes. And guess what, folks? I am not a legal analyst of any sort. If you want to run a disclaimer down on the bottom of the screen, feel free to do that. This is not legal advice, okay? But knowing what we know, this could open up a gigantic can of worms if the injunction is allowed to go through. And it could make for a very busy couple of weeks where we don't know who's in the Derby field, which would be sort of unprecedented.
Yeah, it's a mess, but I think that the Derby does provide a pretty unique opportunity in that it's the only race that we have that has a field of 20. It's limited to 3-year olds. And for a lot of these horses, it might be the only time they ever run this distance. Frequently we see a lot of these horses run and then hey they end up turning into one turn milers, or maybe they'll run 1 mile and 16th or something like that, but they'll cut back. I mean, heck, we've seen uh like I'm just thinking back, Promises Fulfilled turned into a really nice sprinter after running in the
Whitmore,
Derby. Whitmore, so we'll see these horses, down the line, in other races, but it's just a very, very unique race. And so, I was just thinking about like what as somebody, especially like I really wanted to get your, I guess, kind of take on this, because as somebody who's bet way more derbies than I have, I guess what does preparing for the Derby look like for you? What does handicapping the Derby look like for you? And I'm not talking specifically about this year, but I guess in more in generalities, like how do you approach a race like this?
sure. So I'm going to preface this with something to look out for. I think by and large, the Kentucky Derby is an example of overanalysis leading to paralysis. There's a lot of content out there to look at. There's workout videos that a lot of people do a great job going to get. Churchill Downs does a great job with their breakfast at the Derby shows. They stream all of that stuff, and all of the content that you could ask for is going to be online. And that's great. But how closely do we watch workouts when we're doing our normal handicapping for any sort of track on, say, a Thursday or a Friday, or even a Saturday or a Sunday? We don't. We don't do that. And if you wind up diving too deep and straying from the things that make you a successful handicapper, that's not going to go well for you. Because, yes, if a horse is jumping out of its skin the week before the Kentucky Derby and goes 5 furlongs in, I'm going to spit out of time here, 57 seconds, yes, that's noteworthy. If a horse is lollygagging all the way around the track, clearly has a distaste for everything, and goes 5 furlongs in 103, yes, that's also noteworthy. But what we don't know about these horses is their tendencies, their quirks, Are they good workhorses? What's the condition of the track that day? How is it playing? What's the jockey usually have to do to get a horse involved? Is this horse a horse that just doesn't need a lot in the way of morning conditioning and will turn in 5 furlong works and 102 and change every week and be ready, versus a horse that throws 5 furlong bullet drills in 58 and isn't ready on Derby Day? Yes, the content is out there. You should absolutely look and read at. It's usually very good, but don't go too overboard. By all means, look at the workouts. By all means, listen to trainer speak. By all means, see what you can pick up. But at the same time, don't deviate too much from what works for you. Because if you do that, you wind up losing, I think, a lot of your fundamentals. And if you lose the fundamentals, you'll have no idea what you're doing. And any money you put down is going to be less informed money than you'd otherwise spend if you'd simply handicap the race the way you know how to. So that's probably the first big thing that I would stress. The other thing is, it sure seems like this year, more than in past years, there are horses that could potentially win or lose the race at the post position draw. For the most part, over the years, the post position draw doesn't really matter. If you don't have a lot of early speed and you're breaking from post one, you're screwed. That's been pretty much it. Having said that, there are a few horses that have shown some gate issues. And I don't know if I'd be enthusiastic about a horse like Sierra Leone getting an inside post anything lower than 4, for instance, because that horse delayed the start of the Bluegrass by 4 or 5 solid minutes and, for lack of a better term, was a head case both before and during the race. Do you really want a head case that's going to be in traffic for a really long time? And looking at the other favorite with Fierceness. We know what Fierceness can do if Fierceness gets a perfect trip and is able to run his A race without a lot of interference. If Fierceness draws post position 20, I think he gets the big brown trip and it's all over for everybody else. But if Fierceness draws, say, post 4, post 5, something in that mix with a number of speed horses around him that are going to be darting for that prime real estate along the rail, is Fierceness really the horse you want to bet? There are other horses too. Forever Young's got some quirks. Catching Freedom has caught some troubled trips. There are a number of other closers in this race that are going to be pace and trip dependent. Pay attention to the draw this year, folks. Usually it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. It sure seems like this year's a little bit different, though.
Yeah, I earlier in the week I called you and started talking about this idea, and I started giving examples of like what we were going to talk about and things like that, and then like I stopped, like after we got off the phone, I literally basically told myself the same thing that you started off this entire thing with, like, why all of a sudden for this one race am I going to do anything different, right? And I find myself sometimes getting caught up in this on on big days, right? Big days, or in big races, right? All of a sudden, right? I'm very much a Brisnet first, Timeform US, Optic second. Those are my three handicapping tools that I use.
Anything with E8 in the front of it, you're golden.
Yeah,
Track
but
Phantom wins the Derby for Josh right there. I'm calling that in advance.
but it's like, why all of a sudden it's Breeders' Cup? Why am I all of a sudden looking at thoroughgraphs? Like, what am I doing? And I mean, everyone gets caught up in that, right? I think you brought up workouts, and I think I even on our phone call earlier this week brought up workouts and was like, yeah, let's say I watch workouts and I watch all this, and I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I listen and hear what other people say, but like, what ends up happening is every horse is working out as great as it can be, and all this other stuff. And
Well, if I may interrupt really quickly, I think there's something to be said for finding something that jumps off the page. And sometimes looking at those workouts where you have access to them in ways that you don't normally have access to, sometimes that really helps. My dad's biggest Kentucky Derby score, I know because much like me, he can't shut up about this sort of stuff. He had Ferdinand back in the mid 80s based off of a gigantic workout this horse had before the Derby. And he wound up rallying along the rail underneath that beautiful ride from Willie Shoemaker and wound up coming home and paying about $30. You can find certain things like that that are either reasons to include a big price or reasons to toss a short price. But going back to what you said, it's a matter of not going overboard with it, I think.
Yeah. I do think though that what does end up being, I think the most important thing in the Derby ends up being trip. And that is oftentimes it can be something very, very difficult to try and predict. I do think that because of trip being such a, because like I said, this is, it's not just a distance that these horses aren't going very often, but it's a gate that gets used literally one time a year. You know, it's a amount of horses that run at once one time a year here in the US. Obviously, we have races at places like Ascot where you get these many horses. And yeah, so trip becomes immense. You know, you'll see horses that just, they get wiped out at the beginning, or they just, they get a real bad trip, or they get an unlucky trip and hey, get disqualified because another horse decided to stumble for some reason.
I
I'm
knew you
still
were going to
not.
bring that up at some
Still,
point. Yeah,
um,
that other reason, by the way, was because the horse that got disqualified participated in a mugging.
yeah.
Look, it's a horrible beat. I grant you that. I have sympathy for you. I still believe it was the right call, especially because of everything that happened 10 months later.
Um, but that all that being said, I think it's important to think about this race in regards to trip, right? Who do you think, based on the draw, based on the run style, who's gonna have an easier time, right? And who is gonna get that good trip? I think we already talked about. You had mentioned, being stuck on the rail, or being out in the parking lot. Obviously not places that you necessarily want to be, but yeah, I think that first and foremost is what you got to think of. The last couple of years we've definitely, the pace complexion has changed. The last couple of years, we've gotten pace in the Derby, and I know one of the big things with the switch to Derby points. I know people were starting to get concerned that we were going to have paceless derbies all the time, because all these sprinters and all these other horses that were getting in based off of earnings and other things, winning these smaller races and winning them on the front end and just being complete speedballs, that we weren't gonna have those anymore. And lo and behold, the last 2 years that hasn't been necessarily the case. So I do think that we did have a bit of a maybe aberration with a couple of those derbies, with obviously the COVID year with Authentic going wire to wire, Justify, and Medina Spirit, or should we fix it to the actual winner in Mandaloun?
See, you
But
can say that, but much like Charlton Heston with his guns, you can pry my Medina Spirit winnings from my cold,
hmm.
dead hands.
Have I told the Medina Spirit story with Caleb and I?
Um, I feel like you might have, but it was off air. So by all means, feel free to share with our listeners.
So at some point, Caleb and I were having a discussion, and this must have been This must have been right after the Santa Anita Derby. And we both thought that Medina Spirit actually had a shot. And if you looked at his buyer speed figures, if you looked at other things, like he just stacked up very well with some of these other horses, and we we're like looking at it, and we're looking overseas, or we're not. We're looking at overseas, and then we're looking at Circa, and he was like, I want to say 30 or 40 to 1 still, months, like a couple months before the the Derby. He was a pretty good price, and I was flying to Vegas that weekend, and so I told Caleb, I'm like, you know what? I think as soon as I land, I'm just going straight to. I'm going straight there. I'm going straight to Cirque. I'm going to make a bet. It wasn't before. It was Louisiana Derby, I think.
Okay.
Before Louisiana Derby,
So
because
this
it.
would have been after one of the races where he ran second behind Life is Good. There were a
Yeah,
couple of them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And but what ends up happening is Baffert's other horse ends up getting taken off the Derby, the
Life is
trail.
Good. Yeah.
The Who's the other one? The one who he was running in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma?
Yeah, or not Oklahoma, sorry, Arkansas. Same state. Sorry, Chase.
No, no, it's
Um,
really not. Boo
uh,
yourself. Boo yourself. Hit the
I
button right now.
refuse. I refuse to boo myself.
Boo, boo, boo. Okay, keep.
Man, who the heck was the other? It was a two. It was, I don't know. He was a real bad horse. Concert tour. He also ended up like getting like there was like just like a chain reaction of things
Yep.
that happened to where Circa legitimately pulled the odds down
Mhm.
for a day or two. And
Yeah, I
but
think it was when Life is Good came out because Josh, I don't think we've ever really discussed this, but we were both in Vegas at the exact same time because I remember I was waiting for a sandwich at a deli outside the link, and I remember being on my phone and reading the Horse Racing Nation story. And I remember not being surprised. He grew out of it, but early in his career, Life is Good had a stride where every time that horse's hooves hit the ground, I went, ouch. That horse, he needed to mature, and he did, but it was not a pretty picture early on. And I was not surprised that he turned out to be a horse that needed some time after some big races to start his career. But yeah, so you were at Circa, they pulled all the odds down, and you weren't able to make your bet on Medina Spirit.
correct.
That stinks. Um, that's a pretty lousy beat. Um, that year's Derby for me was a roller coaster. For a day and a half, I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with anything. Oaks Day was terrible, absolutely awful. The first half of Kentucky Derby Day was absolutely awful. And then the Churchill Downs is run. That's the 7 furlong race with some sprinters. I had that Flagstaff Lexingtonian exacta, and Lexingtonian was a big, big price. Flagstaff was not favored. I believe Whitmore was favored in that race. I had that exacta a couple of times, saved the weekend. And then we wind up getting to the Kentucky Derby, and you know where this is going. So my mindset going into the Kentucky Derby was, yeah, Essential Quality probably wins, but let's assume Life is Good doesn't exist because for the sake of the Kentucky Derby that year, he didn't. If you just act like Life is Good doesn't exist, Medina Spirit wins a couple of preps in California, runs second behind Rock Your World when that one got loose and got, to quote our friend Caleb, a candy ass trip in the Santa Anita Derby. This horse is 15 to 1 and he should be half that price. I gave him out on the Champagne and JD podcast that year. Shout out to my buddy JD Fox out there if he's listening or watching. Love you, buddy. And Medina Spirit goes out to the front, forgets to stop. We think we know why. And I wound up having my best Kentucky Derby ever because of that. I had a win bet, I had exactas, I had Oaks Derby doubles. I had a lot of things crushed that particular year. And my dad and my then girlfriend, now fiance, got to enjoy that because I bought dinner the following day.
Nice. Yeah, that's always a good feeling when you're able to buy dinner. I was telling the story of the first weekend when I was in at Saratoga a couple years ago, and I hit the pick six. A pick six. It didn't pay much. It was pretty chalky. It was off the turf, because there was a bunch of rain. So like it was small fields, but there was a carryover. But I think it paid somewhere between like 1,800 and 2,500, somewhere in that range.
But plus all the fives or sixes, that's still a good score.
Yeah, yeah. So I ended up getting basically I was like that was my hotel, that was my flight, and that was my gambling money for the entire weekend and my food. Like it was basically everything, right? I was basically free rolling the entire weekend after that. So yeah, so I bought a couple dinners, that week for the group, but yeah, yeah. Not too much. I think you brought up just basically all the points I was going to make about handicapping a derby, which I think was in general, keep it the same. I mean, like you said, there is tons of content out there.
Mm-hmm.
There is, it's easy to get overwhelmed. Obviously, hopefully at this point, you know who to trust, who not to trust, and I'm not saying like I mean, there are, I'm sure, people out there that are doing things malignantly and like giving bad information on purpose.
On
But
horse racing Twitter, Josh,
but
surely you jest.
that's not necessarily the what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like people who handicap similarly to
I
you or
know
have
I'm
same
teasing,
opinions
but
as
yeah,
you. But yeah, just pay attention. We're you're gonna say something, Andrew?
just one thing for after you're done. By all means, keep going.
But yeah, just I just think that the key thing is keep doing what you're doing, right. You don't have to buy all the products, right. Save that money to bet the derby or bet the under races.
Ideally on Amwager with our sign up code that you can find in the description of this podcast.
Well, unfortunately you cannot bet the derby on Amwager, but
We tried. We tried.
but the other thing is the derby is obviously is a big race, but I think you pointed it out pretty well. You can make money on the undercard as well. So
You can, yes. The one thing I do want to stress, and this is a fun riddle, and you can ask 10 different horse racing people this, and I don't know how many people are going to get it right, but there is a right answer. Josh, what is the best piece of information? What is the best source, I should say, of information that a gambler can have before a race?
the odds board.
Bingo, the tote board. Gets overlooked so much in the midst of everything that's out there, in the midst of products, in the midst of videos, in the midst of podcasts. If you're a bettor, that tote board's your Bible, and that's going to dictate a lot of what you do. Look at the probables. Look at as much information as you possibly can. Be prepared for that information to change your viewpoints and your handicapping strategies accordingly. I can tell you that if you are playing a lot of exacta tickets and you are planning on some combination of fierceness and Sierra Leone or Sierra Leone and fierceness, you want to play that combination a lot more because that's going to be underlaid. Or you don't play that combination at all. You play one of those horses with some bigger prices, and you hope you wind up catching a bomb in either first or second with your key horse surrounding that. But the tote board is your friend, and that is going to dictate the strategy and philosophy of any successful horse player. And this goes back to one of the things that we talked about because, Josh, you mentioned the construction of the Derby field, the draw, the pace, the circumstances of the track, the way the track is playing. How is that different from handicapping any other horse race at its core? It's the same fundamental concepts. And that's the thing people forget about when you're talking about a race like the Kentucky Derby. You spend so much time looking at the form, and you should, because there are a fair amount of variables to consider, and you want to be confident in your wagers. But if you overthink things and you wind up in a situation where you're playing tickets and you don't really know what you're playing at the end of it or why you're playing it, that's a losing strategy long term. If you're a successful horse player or someone who prides themselves on being a successful horse player, go with what brought you to the dance. Don't fix something that's not broken. Stay true to your core handicapping principles. Bet accordingly. The Kentucky Derby is hard. 20 times 19, that's 380 possible exacta combinations. 380 times 18, that's the trifecta combinations. 380 times 18 times 17, that's your superfecta combinations. It's hard, but if you hit the Kentucky Derby, you want to make it hurt for the people that are paying you your money. So be smart, be disciplined, see the tote board, bet accordingly.
Well said. I got nothing to add to that.
Every once in a while that happens, Josh. Should I say something stupid to balance it out?
No, we'll give you time to do that on Friday.
I appreciate that. Seriously, join us on Friday. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be some of us, some of our friends, some people that are committing podultery by coming on Friday. That's going to be what is it, 8:30 Eastern time on
Yep,
Friday?
8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central. We're just going to have a little
5:30
bit of
for
fun.
those of us in Pacific time. As far as if you're in Mountain time, sorry, we can't help you. But it's going to be a lot of fun. We tested out some things before this show. So if you're around, if you've got nothing better to do on a Friday night, we don't judge, but come, be in the audience, be in the crowd. There's going to be a lot of ways in which you can get involved, have some fun with us, and just kick back, relax, and have a good time.
Yeah, we're gonna play a little Jackbox and just have a little bit of a casual night with
It
some
will be
friends.
casual until someone other than me wins, in which case we're going to start throwing things and cutting wrestling promos.
Oh goodness.
Yep.
But that's going to do it for us. Obviously, check us out at ontherwronglead.com, at wrong_lead. Like and subscribe. Hit all the buttons. Andrew is at Andrew Champagne. I am at Cherry Drank. Have a good week, guys.